What's up, guys? Welcome to another Left Stick Right Stick official masterclass recording. This is phase 3 of Sculpting a Male Bust, Finding Your Own Style with Kareem. A quick reminder, the moves are the recommended controller of choice for this
now
masterclass.
We're about to start phase 3, where things get more organic. This is actually my favorite phase, because you can really express your own individual style. Here we go. And now for the third phase, we've sped up the video a bit more because we're focusing more on techniques rather than the step-by-step operations. Again, using the soft blended sphere, I will carve the top part of the nose and that section beside the eye that gives the eye the surround groove it needs. This is a stage where you rely more on your feeling and your eye, like this tiny little bit in the eye, and to add the wrinkles, for example, beside the eye, I will use the soft blended sphere. I usually rely at this stage on the soft blended sphere to add detail and the cylinder to cut and to create the lines. With a soft blended cylinder, you get quite nice lines, like here to do the wrinkles. I'm using the cylinder and using the soft blend to get those marks, while adding with the soft blended sphere gives a muscle-like structure. I used a very thin sphere to make that indentation behind the nose to carve the shape of the cheek and how it meets the nose. And you can see it's like in clay when you're carving little details, using a mix of the soft blended cylinder and the soft blended sphere. I'm creating that mark here, and now it's the time to sort of pick up any little pieces that I want to tune or refine. This part here where we did the filtering before, I curve a bit so the curve can come outwards like that using the sphere. And this is a stage of sculpture that is more about small marks and small details, turning around my head and seeing what needs work, adding a muscle here or there. There is that muscle under the mouth, and using the cylinder to carve now my chin. It's nice in sculpture to not have everything grounded. It's nice to have that chiseled, faceted look. And you still keep the curves that you've created before using the sphere. But now using the subtract, I make accentuations and create these facets that give a nicer sculpture quality. So it's like a stage where I turn like this little cut here around the ear to make the shape more sculptural and anatomically satisfying. It's all about going around the head now and cutting and carving to describe the shapes with more sculptural sensibilities. The eyelid that we created before using the 3 cylinders that we stamped, I can now do extra cuts on it to carve it. The head as well, adding those facets like we did to the chin. And when you turn soft blend on, it softens the cuts, so you can go between very sort of semi-sharp cuts to softer cuts, move a bit around like the bottom of the eye. Very refined small decisions that add more sculptural detail. Now I've changed to the smear tool, and this is a different style of sculpture than what we've done so far. This allows me to do a more chiseled look, and to do that I'm going to pick a mixed color to do the hair. Like now that I am picking just one color, you can see that it just puts it in black. Instead, I'll pick several tones of dark colors, of black tones and dark blues and dark reds, and drag them onto the color mixer to get a variety of tones in my smears. So see, the smear places multiple edits in one press, so you can actually paint with your sculpture rather than place one careful edit after the other. I kept this technique till we got to a good place with the head, and I'm going to use the smear tool to make the hair, as the hair is more forgiving and we don't have to be very correct with the marks we're making. So using the smear tool for hair is not a bad place to start, as you move your hand fast and it makes sculptural marks. I still have my mirror on. I've turned on the looseness tool as well, which is on my secondary motion controller, and it adds this fuzziness to my sculpture by pressing and twisting. And all the shortcuts I'm using are going to be written on the side of this masterclass. So using the loosened mark, and I'm using the smear tool now to create the hair. And as you can see, I'm still turning around my shape. Because I chose a mixed color, the color is not just coming out as one brown tone, it's picking different shades that I have picked in my color mixer. And I'm just carving around the head that I did before, making the marks of the hair, still using the mirror to do the first part, and not really worrying too much about getting the shape perfect because it's the hair. Now I'm going to turn the mirror off to get an asymmetrical design for the hairstyle, putting just different marks to suggest the shape of the hairstyle. And the nice thing about the loosening tool, which allows you to make your shapes more impressionistic and fuzzy, you can always tighten it again to do a tight cut like that, and then you can get a variety of texture. You don't have to have it all fuzzy. You can do a fuzzy mark and then a sharp cut. And between the techniques that you can arrive at, see here I am changing the looseness while I'm working to variate the texture of my model, using different cuts to form that hairstyle. So it's nice that although I placed earlier the shapes without that much intention, using the cuts I now can carve the silhouette into something more appealing, and using the cuts to create indentations that suggest hair direction. This stage you can spend ages and you can do the whole sculpture in that technique, but I thought to show it to you on the hair rather than doing the whole sculpture with it, just to get a taster of what that style of sculpture looks like. It's more sketchy. It's nice to zoom out and zoom back in to see what you're doing, and from a distance. Now I picked the spray paint tool, which allows me to paint my model after the fact without adding any sculptural form. You just pick the color and then you paint over your sculpture. I'm going to use this, and I'm going to soft blend it using the same soft blend button and gesture from before. I can soft blend the color instead of the form. And I'm going just to choose different tones of color to paint my head and put some dark parts in the dark sections. It's always nice, even though we have light describing all the shadows, it's nice sometimes in the areas of grooves to add darker tones in them. And now I'm just painting with a very light opacity where the hair meets the head to suggest a blend of hair onto the skull, onto the head. And the thing I'm going to do after that, this is just color, and I can pick color from my object, which I'm doing now. I'm using the color picker, and it allows you to pick colors from the scene as well as mix them. That's one of its perks. I'm also painting looseness on my model. So even looseness is a parameter. You can pick the looseness tool and make an area that was initially sharp more fuzzy after the fact as well. So you can use that technique to do facial hair, for example. First, I'm going to color the beard section with low opacity green or greenish brown. And you can decrease the opacity of your marks so they don't appear in full opacity. That helps you get more of a blended color. So I'm first painting the beard section or the stubble section with that color. And then get the looseness tool and dial up the looseness. And when I paint over the model, it gets a bit more fuzzy in this area, giving a suggestion of stubble. That's a nice technique to use it to do hair or to use it to do grass in a scene. It's pretty useful. Going between painting, and this side of the model is appearing more green because there's a blue light hitting the face, so that's what makes it look a bit greener. Now I go back to sculpting again. So you can jump between sculpture, painting. Using the smear technique, I just carve a few bits here and there to get, again, this imperfect result. It's nice to not have everything feel like it's made out of soft balls. The balls or the spheres were useful to start with to get the general shape of the model. And then you can start carving with the smear tool, just very small indentations like that for the chin. You can spend ages on that stage and really take the model to a very handmade quality. I didn't want to spend all the masterclass doing this technique, as this is something that you will spend time and find your own marks, but I just wanted to give a quick display of what it looks like to use it on top of a more careful process. Now I want to color the eyes. So I'm going to first darken around where the eye meets the nose, use some darker tones there. And also on this side of the eyelid, we also tend to have it being darker. Sometimes these are just shadows really, but I think painting a little bit of that accentuates the model and makes it look more convincing. To describe the eye in one sculpture, because in this masterclass we're not doing the eye as a separate element that we articulate and have the eyelids close and open. This is more of an illustrated solution rather than an animation-friendly one. So I'm just going to create an indentation for the eye, where the eye goes. And now, instead of adding the iris in the same sculpture, I'm just going to do a new sculpture just for this black bit in the center of the eye, so I can choose a different material, as we only have one material per sculpture. So for this section, I'm going to use a shiny material to get just that little bit of shine on the iris. So you can see you can have variety of materials in one model using this technique. You just create a new sculpture and then you place it, intersect it with your other one, and you have a variety of shininess. The main head is matte and this part alone is shiny. Now I go back into the previous sculpture and paint around it with a dark color to blend it more and not make it stand out. That starts to work. Always looking at it from a distance. Once I'm happy with it, I take a copy of the sculpture that I did using the clone tool in assembly and I copy it back in the sculpture again to color around and blend it with the sculpture. There you go. We've got shiny eyeballs here, or shiny irises that have a little bit more of a convincing result. I will continue to develop this area in the next step. To do the eyelashes, I still want to sort of tighten the eyelid a bit more, because the eyelid is quite a complex shape. Initially, we started with the cylinders, but now that we're in this stage, we can cut further and just blend it more into a more flowing shape that is thinner and more convincing. You can spend much more time just doing that until the shape is completely right. It's always nice to work from a reference photo or even a reference sculpture that you have beside you, so you can try to recreate that. Now, back in my sculpture, using a very loose cylinder that I've used the looseness dial on to get it to look as fuzzy as I can. And I'm just drawing the eyelash on top where the eyelid ends. And because it's a male bust, just try to make it thin enough to work. It's a fine tuning. You have to sort of keep looking, zooming out, making it smaller, making it bigger till it works. Again, using my mixed color to do the eyebrows, using the same technique we used in the eyelashes, very loose, and it's because within the sculptures you can have the varying looseness that we used in the hair and the stubble. Now I'm adding those very small stretched cylinders with looseness on to give that result. I'm not really expecting you to follow everything I'm doing here. This section is intended to give you insight into some sculptural techniques. Adding and cutting and carving the shape can go on till you really get to a very high level of detail that finds the right balance between the detail of the head you want to do and the sculpture stylization. Sometimes you will want your sculpture to be very soft and all realistic, or you want it to be very faceted and stylized. At some point, we will have many different sculpture and art classes to talk about stylization and techniques. The bottom part of the eyelid is much smaller than the top part, just enough to describe the shape of the eye, and it's towards the outside rather than it going all the way to the inside. And after I've added a few sculptural edits, now I'm just using spray paint, only to do the last part. So I can go from adding sculptural additions to just painting over the model. And every time you catch your model from a different angle, you can go and correct and modify. Here I'm making where the hair meets the skull or the head flatter so it flows better. That's the purpose of moving around so much, that you keep seeing different angles and questioning them and refining them further. The coloring as well, you can keep layering, adding dark tones and then adding light tones on top of the dark tones to make them more blended. Here I'm just adding the muscle that makes the indentation of because there's a muscle that comes on top of the eyelid. The eyelid isn't that big. We do the eyelid huge first, and then in the very end you cover it with that muscle that goes on top of it. And you can do that technique of softening areas as much as you like. But that takes our model to a more refined result and shows you a very quick insight into some more techniques that are useful to see. Now I will show you how to save your work from this scene. First, select both parts of the bust. Then open the assembly menu and hit Group, which is in the context menu. Now, with the group selected, click Save as a new creation in the context menu and follow the instructions. So there we have it. That's the end of our sculpture masterclass. I hope you found it enjoyable and
I hope you found this
inspired
tutorial
to
recording
make your
useful.
own
Click that like button below if you did.
We're
And stay
looking
tuned
forward
to
seeing them
LSRS for
in the
more Dreams
Dreamverse.
content.